start tonight with a little overview of what school rating systems are like now, and then we're going to have a panel talk about what that really looks like, not just from this high level, but on the ground as teachers, parents, and students. Then we're going to have our guest speaker talk about, in part, about a project that is happening in Massachusetts, where they've developed an alternative rating system that's really driven by what the community wants to know about their schools. We'll have a little Q&A, and then we'll have another exercise to get you guys up and on your feet and thinking about what makes a school great. So I'm going to start with a little overview here, and I hope this is seeable. So I'm going to talk about what our current school rating systems look like. I'll really focus on Chicago, but I'll also touch on like a new state system and some of the other ones that you kind of see in different places. Especially talking about what are the inputs to these systems, and then we'll talk a bit more about the intended and the unintended consequences of being a high-rated or a low-rated school, and how that feeds into a lot of other things like enrollment and funding, and sort of the cycle of that. So here we'll take a look at some different existing rating systems. One is the CPS rating system. I think I have a little light, but oh, I just don't know how to point with my light. Okay, and we'll go to that one first. So CPS has had a school rating system for a while. This isn't something that the state requires or the federal government requires. This is just CPS policy to have this. And currently it's a 5-level system, which they have sneakily labeled 1+1, 2+2, and 3. So there's a lot of ways to be a level 1 school because there's 2 level 1s. It's really a system that's really heavily dependent on test scores. And so you can see, especially at the elementary level, a lot of the points that go into your level rating are from test-based metrics. And at the high school level, it's a little less, about 25% versus the 65% at the elementary level. Another important category, especially at elementary, is attendance, and that also plays a part in the high school rating. And there's also something that we'll talk about a couple times tonight is the 5 essentials. So that's really a survey that's supposed to be giving a measure of the culture and climate of a school, and teachers, parents, and students fill it out. I think it's only teacher and parent surveys that are calculated into the rating. So one big change that has happened through the years in the CPS rating system is that we're now looking not just at the absolute level of test scores, but the change in test scores over time. So, I really don't know how to run this thing. Okay, and that is sort of the difference between test score attainment and test score growth. So a lot of what we end up measuring with standardized tests is actually demographic factors. And so the intention in incorporating this growth idea is that maybe you're showing up to school and scoring high because you're not hungry and you're not tired and you're not stressed, and for all kinds of factors like that. But if after a year your scores have gone up, then the school should get credit for your scores going up, not just for how high you've scored when you walked in the door. And so the intention there is to sort of break that correlation between test score and demographics, and there's a lot of reasons why demographics sort of drive test scores, and I think we'll kind of talk about that throughout the night. And so some of them are sort of these basic things of like, are you in the physical and mental state that you're going to be able to do your best on a standardized test? Some of them are in the design of the test themselves, like the people that were paying to design and write questions and sell those tests have biases built into the culture that they're measuring with these tests. And so all of these kind of factors play into that absolute level. So the idea was that if you could escape from that by just measuring how much you've pushed up scores, that might sort of break that correlation. Unfortunately, we see that actually the statistic that's in the SQRP, the CPS rating policy, it's called the National Growth Percentile, it's still negatively correlated with basically the percentage of low-income students you have at your school. And then ultimately the overall level rating that we're assigning is also negatively correlated. So even once we've incorporated growth into the school rating, we're still ultimately really measuring to a large degree the demographics of a community and not necessarily how that school is doing and what a child's experience at that school is. I'm sorry to make everyone like nauseous with my scrolling. There's a little blurb to show you. Yeah, so I mean, like, if you do a statistical model of school ratings and you compare them to demographics, you can see the amount that just changing your low income percentage will push you up, aside from any other factors. So we'll do a little Q&A thing kind of in between the panels. So if you can write down your questions, we'll get them answered at some point. Okay. Am I going the right way? No. Okay. There's a bunch of other systems. I'll just tell you briefly about the state system. It really is using a lot of the same things that CPS is doing. In the past, the state would just put up a report card with a lot of this information for each school and each district in the state. Now, with the change in federal law, they're going to start assigning a level rating that they're going to call a tier rating. So you'll have tiers 1 through 4. Really, a lot of the same inputs, though, are part of the state system. So it's very heavily dependent on test scores, including some measures of growth and also looking at test scores according to particular demographic groups to see if schools are doing well, not just with some students, but with all students. High school also takes into account things like graduation rate. Chronic absenteeism is sort of a measure of attendance, and that is weighted fairly heavily. And I think sort of in the marketing of the changes in the federal law and the state law, you see that like we're really going to try to incorporate these new, more interesting measures than just test scores. But ultimately, the percentage that's really being assigned to that and the sorts of things that they're going to use for that are not necessarily the sort of full qualitative picture that it may be portrayed as. Okay. There's also things that you see like the US News and World Report rankings or the Blue Ribbon Schools rating, and these are also very heavily dependent on test scores. We'll make a spreadsheet available online after this, and so you can kind of like delve into each one of these and see sort of how much weight is put on the different things. In some cases, it's like for Blue Ribbon Schools, you have to have certain scores to qualify to even sort of be put in the running for the award. And so it runs more like that. One program that we see a lot on real estate websites is this Great Schools rating. It's 1 through 10, and it too is very heavily weighted towards standardized test scores. Okay, so we see all these different systems. They've been created in some cases for different purposes. Some are really to give parents information. Some are really to give policymakers information, but they are very heavily dependent on test scores, and even some of these other measures, aside from test scores, like attendance or absenteeism, ultimately end up being things that are really driven by demographic things. And so, you know, the same reasons that make you well prepared to take a standardized test on a particular day are also a lot of the reasons that you can regularly attend school, get to school on time, and you aren't missing lots of days. So if you are in good health, if you have access to clean clothing because you have laundry facilities, all these things are very much driven by a lot of the same factors ultimately. Another thing that is in common among all these systems is that they're actually very high stakes. So these ratings really matter in the real world. And so I'll sort of go through kind of like the cycle of how these ratings drive other things. And so there's this concept of a vicious cycle where bad things lead to bad things, which then further cause even worse things. And so the flip side of that is the virtuous cycle, where good things lead to even better, which then feed those same good things. And we really see that with school ratings. And so if we start with ratings, so we have this school, it's high rated, and it has students who are scoring well on tests, and they're graduating, and they're attending regularly, and they're graduating on time and enrolling in college, it's gonna be getting high ratings. Or the flip side, the school is not doing any of those things, or the students of the school aren't doing those things, and they're getting low ratings. So as a school has high ratings and a good reputation, that drives enrollment. And so if you're doing great, more people want to come, families move into the neighborhood to enroll their kid there. And the opposite is that if your reputation is poor and people stay away and you're dropping enrollment. Enrollment really then drives property values. And so as there's more demand for housing, if there's demand for a school, there's demand for housing. And if you're not increasing the housing supply and you're not adding affordable housing, then you end up with housing costs increase. In Illinois, a lot of our K through 12 school funding is from local property taxes. So as you have a community with high property values, that's gonna generate more revenue for the same tax rate as is generated in a poorer community with lower property values. And so that funding, when you have extra funding, you can have more resources. If you have less funding, you can't have as many teachers, you have bigger classes, you don't have as many courses in your course catalog, you don't have as many extracurricular activities. And so then your resources can really determine your ratings, like how well are you as a school and a community providing the resources that your children need in the school to be supported and to really engage your students. So there's other kind of shortcuts through this cycle that we see. So property values can directly impact ratings, and enrollment can directly impact funding. So with property values, when you have higher property values, your housing is more expensive, so you're only gonna have wealthy kids in that school district. And those are the kids who are already gonna show up at school with glasses and nutritious meals, and they'll also have environmental, like in their own neighborhood, you're gonna have less environmental pollution, less lead in your water, your heat and your electricity are gonna be on at home regularly, and you're gonna have regular transportation to school. In CPS, higher enrollment directly impacts your funding because every student comes with a little pot of dollars attached to them. And so as you add students, you add dollars. And so that cycle from enrollment to resources to ratings is really tight in CPS since student-based budgeting was implemented. Another thing that happens in CPS is that just having higher ratings ends up causing you to have higher ratings because we sort students in the first place based on their test scores. And so kids are being sorted into schools on test scores, and then schools are being rated on these properties of the students before they even walk in the door. WBZ had a great story on this a couple of years ago called The Big Sort, which I highly recommend. And it's kind of shocking that, then these schools that are taking kids with the lowest test scores are then being labeled as failing schools based on things that they really have no control over. Another thing that's really being driven by this thing that's sort of outside the cycle and it's kind of like the dead end of the cycle is school closings. And so school closings are justified both on low ratings and on low enrollment. And this is sort of it's really built into the policies that we have. So we saw that the school quality rating policy is, the ratings actually correlate with student income levels. And then on top of that, the school action policy in CPS says that a necessary condition for closure is that you have a higher rated school to send the kids to. So ultimately, those school action guidelines are biased towards disrupting the education of poorer students and school communities with fewer resources. And so we can kind of sum up this entire cycle with a concept from sociology. It's called the Matthew effect. And so it's from this proverb, Matthew 25:29, which I am so unable to read, but I'm going to read it. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And so it's really a story of the haves get more and the have-nots get less. And that's really how this cycle works. And ultimately, the effects of this are very pernicious on the whole system. So, you know, the Matthew effect ends up worsening the existing inequality and the segregation by race and class that we have had here for a century. And it's really exacerbating the segregation that we have in housing and schools. It's bestowing the most benefits on the students and communities that already have them. And perhaps even worse, when we do see some constructive efforts to desegregate, then parents in privileged demographics are like, I don't want my kids sent to this school that was previously very segregated. They can point to that and say, oh, well, and look at that school rating. It's a failing school. I don't want my kids sent to that failing school. So you can sort of use that failing school label to paper over the fact that you don't want to send your kid to school with students of color or students who are poorer than your student. And we see this all over the place, right? So we see this in the suburbs of Chicago. We've seen this in the city of Chicago. There's been some great reporting by the MacArthur Fellow in the New York Times about this happening in New York City. So it's really all kind of tied in together. And one other thing that we're really going to talk more about on the panel is that when the stakes are so high, even sort of useful indicators, things that we think are actually maybe the reasonable measures in isolation to use to evaluate schools, end up becoming really problematic. So that's another concept from sociology called Campbell's law. So the more any indicator is used for decision making, the more apt it is to be distorted and corrupted. And we really see that in how these high-stakes school ratings are driving stuff on the ground in schools. So I won't go into too much detail on this because I think the panel will do a better job of talking about it in concrete than me talking about it in abstract. But it's really things like, you know, the cheating scandals that we've seen all over the country, teaching to the test, and the time spent on test prep and the money spent on those things are all really part of this school rating cycle. Okay, so I think the main takeaway here is, for me, is just that like this is really driving some bad on the ground educational experiences, and it's also really driving things that we don't want to increase. It's driving inequity, and it's driving segregation, and it's not driving the highest quality educational experiences for all kids in our city and our state. So that's enough of me blabbing. We're gonna go to the panel now. We'll turn on the lights. Yes, that is next. So our panel will be moderated by Brenda Delgado. A raise your hand parent. Thank you, Cassie.
So if I could have my panelists come up and take a seat. My phenomenal superstar, Jen. Jen Nava is a sophomore at Kelly High School, and she's an alumna of Brighton Park Elementary. She works with Brighton Park Neighborhood Council, the Chicago Youth Council, and Student Voice Committee at Kelly High School. She's organized campaigns around opt-out of standardized testing and the need for an elected school board. She's currently helping the campaign to fight school closures, #RomHatesUs. Thanks, Jen. We have Jeanette Taylor right next to her. Jeanette is a parent advocate, a mother of 5, and a nana of 1. I love that. She served on the Mollison Local School Council for 20 years as a parent member, and she's currently the education organizer for the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. In 2016, Janet was one of the leaders of the Diet Hunger Strikers, woohoo! Whose 34-day protest successfully led to CPS reopening a closed neighborhood high school. Thank you, Jeanette. We have over here at the end, Eric Reyes is a proud product of CPS and a parent of a CPS student at Tepochcali Elementary, where he serves on the LSC. He holds an MA in Sociology and Education from Teachers College, Columbia University. His work focuses on teen learning in libraries. He's also a member of the Chicago ACT Collective, is it ACT? A group of arts activists. And finally, but not least, but it's on my cell phone, hold on. We have Felicia Williams. Felicia has been a blended preschool Head Start teacher at Langston Hughes since the fall of 2013. She previously taught at Cone, which closed in spring of 2013. She's been teaching for over 16 years, every single grade between birth and 3rd, except 2nd grade. Those 2nd graders are something. She's a proud wife and parent of 4 daughters. Bless you. Her youngest will be graduating and off to college this year. Congratulations. All her daughters have been enrolled in CPS at one time or another. So thank you, panel, for being with us today. And I'm Brenda Delgado. I'm a board member of Raise Your Hand. I have 3 kids at CPS. I commute 200 miles a week to get them there and back. Excellent. Yeah. My neighborhood school's been closed 3 times on the corner of 51st and Michigan. Okay, so question number 1, and I almost can know for some of you, I don't know Felicia that well, what your answer is going to be, so I love this. If you could each chime in. Do you think your school's level rating is a fair picture of what your school is like? And I want to give that one to Jen first.
I was hoping you'd come to me last, so that's the process. But as said before, I'm a sophomore at Kelly, and under no circumstances do I ever think a rating like that is proper or shows what a school truly is. Kelly's rating is a 2+, which I don't even know if that's good. Like, their rating system is horrible. And I've actually talked about the rating system to my 6-year-old nephew, and I explained it to him. He's like, "That's stupid." He's like, "There's no such thing as 2+." And I was like, "You're a pretty smart kid." But of course, like, no rating system, especially one created by people who have never been to CPS schools, public schools, should be considered, fact. So, no, of course, I don't think the rating system, especially at my school, is proper or, I would give from their rating system or like my own. If I could rate it, like a 10 out of 10, Of course. Because it's not always like whether I get A's or if I get 100% on these tests. Like, those things are like, those should be like at the bottom of your list to grade how a school works. Should be, are the students getting supported? Do they have a proper support system? Are they feeling comfortable in their culture, where they are, the building? Do they have a strong relationship with their teachers? Everything that means what it should be, what school should mean, should be the things that are at the very top of the list. And test scores should be at the very bottom. That's what I think. There's other ways to properly evaluate a school, and test scores is not one of them. Yeah.
Are there any strengths or weaknesses about your school not reflected in the level rating? And I'll turn that up to any of you who want to chime in.
Probably not. A clerk who's been at the school for 25 years knows all the kids and parents by name. That's not in the school ratings. We know that CPS doesn't even respect its own ratings. Think about it. They're closing a level 1 school, NTA. So what do they think about a level? Let's be honest. the rating system is really used to target Black and brown students. Let's be honest what this is. It's a way to close schools in Black and brown neighborhoods. And so to me, the rating system never is going to be able to reflect what goes on in those buildings, because you have people who've been in those buildings for years and love those young people and understand that they don't eat breakfast sometimes, that they are the adult in their home. And so to come to school and listen to some other adult is crazy to them. The school rating system is a sham, let's be honest, and it's used definitely in Chicago. It really started with Paul Vallison in probation, let's be honest. That's where the school rating system comes from. And so it's a way to punish teachers and families for not meeting these expectations that are outrageous. Adults don't test well, so you expect students to do the same. So to me, it just seems like an outrageous way to close schools, and you use that silly little formula to say so. And I give all of our schools a 1, because it takes a lot to get up every day to want to go to those buildings that are in shams. And we're sitting in a level 1 school and the bathroom she said 1 stall, am I correct? Like, this is a level 1 school. My son goes to Ray, and Ray has its issues, but it's a level 1 school. And it doesn't talk about some of the racism that happens in some of the schools. It doesn't talk about us not talking about sexual ed and some of the cyber and bullies. So the rating system is garbage, and it's just a way to close schools, in my opinion.
Well, one of the things that I think about when I think about school ratings, I think my preliminary thoughts are, what do we want to do with this rating? Are we there to build up schools? Are we there to show schools putting their best foot forward? Or are we there to close them? Are we there to find excuses why we shouldn't fund them? Are we there to replace them with a charter school? So that's my prevailing thoughts when I think of school ratings. My daughters have been in and out of CPS because I've had to pick schools that I felt would reflect what I want them to learn. And that couldn't find that in a school rating. One of my daughters went to Black. Black was Robert A. Black. Black was one of the premier schools on the southeast side for a long time. And I picked that school because it was in a great neighborhood in what they call Pill Hill. I picked that school because they had really good foundational teachers. I picked that school because they did have programs there that supported growth and learning. Unfortunately, they have been defunded, and a lot of those programs and a lot of those incentives for wanting to go to that school are no longer there. Just like Dunbar, when I talked about her experience at Dunbar. And then one of my other daughters went to South Loop, one of the premier schools in the central Chicago area. I picked that school primarily because of the awesome parent program that they had there. The parents pretty much had such a loud voice in the school that a lot of advantages and a lot of learning experiences were offered that not other students or other schools could have. And that wasn't in the school rating. Another reason why I picked South Loop is because it was very diverse. It had a lot of different ethnic, social, economic backgrounds that I felt my daughter could benefit from, because since preschool, I have handpicked schools that represented the larger body of what Chicago represents, what the country represents, and what the globe represents. Those are things that I look for in a school. So that is not in a rating. And it could be level 1 all day, but quite frankly, if you are not meeting the needs, and you have to actually go to these schools to see where your needs are being met, because you're not going to see it in a rating. I just want to quickly say that I looked up my own school where I work at, and they have a brief synopsis that when you click on When you go online, of course, they give you a really colorful map of what's a level 1 school and what's a level 3 school and what's a level 2 school. So you know right off the bat what the loser schools are and where they're located, so to speak, according to CPS. And then I looked on here and they give very paltry information about what my school is about. It only tells you that it's in what the data reflects for testing. It only tells you that that we are a STEM initiative, but it doesn't tell you all the programs that go with that. How many times we won grants for robotics and for science gardens and for working with people at the university level. It doesn't tell you about the world language program that we have at Langston Hughes, where we have a Japanese representation in our school. I can't think of the name. What's the name? Consulate, thank you. A consulate now that has, because we have found funding again for that, because we lost it for a few years. It doesn't tell you about that. It doesn't tell you about how the teachers stay there, almost spend the night there. Half of the school is there early, before 7:45, late after 5 o'clock, preparing for the next day, because our babies need lots of preparation, because as what Cassie showed you, there are lots of needs that need to be addressed when you're dealing with communities in need. It's not that they're disadvantaged, it's just that there's some certain basic needs that may not be met, but a school rating is not going to tell you that. So that's why school ratings have no real value.
Sure. So in 2012, I was going through the kindergarten selection nightmare process, and my daughter got a couple of offers, like to two highly rated, good reputation magnet schools on the north side. And when we went to go visit, we never met with the principal. It was the vice principal who met us at the door and just pontificated about every kid gets an iPad, or these are our test scores, which, my wife and I went to CPS. We know like schools are way more than just those test scores. And we ended up selecting Teplitchkali because it's a fine arts dual language school. Those are the things that we value. So at the time, it was rated level 3. It's the lowest level. It was on probation. Our principal's been there for about 25 years now, and she was one of the founding teachers of the school. She's amazing. And most of the staff has been there since the 90s. They probably have like a 90% teacher retention rate because people love working with that principal and with the students of Little Village. So like we knew that right off the bat, the tests weren't going to be measuring the things that we liked. There's a great fine arts program there. CAPE does programming through there. Community Art Partnerships and Education. They're a nonprofit downtown. They do after-school programming, and they do school programming during the day, and they do art shows with the parents after school. Teplitchkali also has, it was one of the community schools, and it has a nonprofit attached to it. So that nonprofit's called TSEP, and the TSEP provides some of those things that everybody's talking about students needing, just more supportive services, language services for parents. Most recently with the political climate, they organized ways for parents to sign over temporary guardianship just in case they were obtained by ICE. So this is the kind of like community stuff that our school is doing. It's really important, and there's no value added measure that gets added on top of that. And what's really great is it's a dual language pedagogy. So my daughter, who is English dominant, I'm English dominant, I only speak English. My wife speaks some Spanish. We put her in there at kindergarten, and now she's fluent at 4th grade in Spanish. That opens up so many doors for us, for her, that we weren't sure if a school could do it, but they did it. And that's one of the things we valued, is like being able to speak other languages, being able to express herself through the arts, being able to be part of a community that needs help, empathy.
Does the Portugali stress about the test ratings and what their next school rating is? Do they put a big emphasis on that?
No. We know it's there, and it's always something that is on the minds of the staff. But you never see that stress come down to the students. So our ratings level, when they change it. So it goes between 2+ and 1, and nobody really gives a crap. Yeah. We were talking with while we were doing this high school selection thing. The kindergarten selection thing. We went to Whittier, which was across the street from us. It's our neighborhood school. CPS removed their principal, so we were a little wary of putting our kid into a school that was destabilized. But we talked with our counselor, and she said, our test scores aren't that great, but by 8th grade, our Spanish-dominant kids catch up, and they know 2 languages. So if they took that aggregated score and saw it, how there's a progression, and that you kind of need to give kids time to get there, that they can do it. It's just that those supports don't always exist for people who can't at that moment. So.
I'm interested in Felicia and Jeanette for your schools.
Brenda, I want to remind you, you need to speak into the mic so that the CAN TV recording picks up your question.
For Felicia.
I just want to thank Kenwood Academy for hosting us. And
For Jeanette, who's an LSC member, and for Felicia, who's a teacher, and for different school perspective, does your school fret about that school rating and how the test scores come up every year? And what does that mean for the students?
So at Mollison, of course, it's stressful because you have tenured teachers who worried about losing their jobs if young people don't test very well. For young people, it's about going to a great high school, being able to go to some of those selective enrollment high schools. And so it is very stressful as a parent, just trying to be able to figure out making sure that the kids are eating breakfast. So CPS used to send out this beautiful letter that said, we're gonna test this week, make sure your kids go to bed early on time, make sure they eat breakfast. What if I don't have breakfast? Is that something you're providing? And so to me, it is very overwhelming, especially for 7th and 8th graders when they're trying to get into the school of their choice. And so for us, it's always being on edge. It's always worrying about, once you go to a level 3, that's it. We know what comes next. They're coming to close the school. And so for us, it's always this thing of never being good enough. That's how young people and parents are made to feel. Because it's like, how can you expect for students to turn out to be these great test takers, because that's what they are, great test takers, if they aren't given the supports they need? And so for us, my thing is, I can take a test grade, but can I read? That's never reflected in the school rating. Can a child read? You have a lot of kids who go to high school who cannot read and cannot divide or multiply. And so the school ratings to me is, I go back and say, it's a scam. It's a way to disinvest and really to say, poor communities don't get their just due and they need to listen to us. Think about what they do with school ratings. Back in 2013, we have that in common. She was a receiving school, I was a parent at a receiving school. And it's been some years later, those schools we're never gonna be a level 1 for a bunch of reasons. The kids still identify as Overton students and Mollison students 5 or 6 years later. And that's just something that you never mend with young people. It's just, it's a system that we need to throw away. And what we really need to think about is, if school ratings are the way to rate schools, what happens when I look at a school, so they're a level 1 school, but a student brings a gun? So they can test well, but we don't talk about safety. We have incidents of young people touching each other. So we're level 1 school, but we don't have conversations about safe sex. So those are the things that school ratings don't address, and it's one of the reasons why they're really stressful and they're not a good indicator of what a school is like. I went to Mollison School. My mother was the clerk there 30 years. My auntie's been a teacher there for 15 years. All 5 of my kids went there, and my banana, I call her Nana's banana, she will go to Mollison, and looking at a school rate is never going to say Mollison is a home away from home for us and for my family for generations. And so it's like, if I look at what's on CPS's website, it's a school that's not going anywhere. And when we look up, according to the school rating, it'll be Obama prep. It'll be some charter school. It'll be something other than the home that it's always been to families.
It is the bane of our existence, bane. And when I say that, I mean it takes veteran good teachers and it really asks them to cultivate really bad teaching practices. I have this acronym, it's called Bandz, cutting out basic academic needs of our students. Because there is so much pressure from the networks, and probably from the networks there's so much pressure from downtown. Wherever it's initiating, there's pressure filters down to the principals who put all this unjust, unneeded pressure on how to take a test that dominates most of our years, so that there's no time and no real place to teach children how to do basic things like how to write. Do you know how many children in elementary in Chicago public schools that really do not know how to write? They may be able to tell you what a noun is because it's on a test. They may be able to identify the subject because it's on a test, but they don't know how to put all those things together and make a sentence that makes a paragraph, that makes an essay that will put them in a college where they can truly be college and career ready. So it also teaches them how to lie. It teaches students, parents, and teachers how to lie. Because guess what? We have to take this thing called the My Voice, My School, My Voice survey. And what is that? The 5 essentials, the one that you're talking about, what really is that? What is that when you have, in some cases, not at our particular school, but in some schools, teachers that have come said that their principal actually stands behind them while they fill out the survey. So what accuracy are you going to get from that? What accuracy are you going to get from that? And why is it held to such high esteem as far as our rating when the students and the parents that you ask to take this, 9 times out of 10, the schools that really, really are good, they know how to bribe the students with an incentive to say, take the survey, because if you do, you'll get, if everyone takes the survey, they'll get to go to recess, so they'll get extra this, so they'll be able to do this. They provide food for parents. So these are not real ways to measure what a school is to the students, to the staff, and to its community. Because who wants to shoot themselves in the foot, especially a staff member, if you know that part of the reason that's going to keep your school open is determining that one of the determining factors is how well you answer the questions on this survey. So what purpose is it serving? The other reason why I feel like it's cultivating bad teaching practices, as we've said all along, you're teaching to the test. And the score, and when you don't hit the mark that they want you to hit, they do things like this. I don't know if everyone can see, they make these babies, first graders, second graders, kindergartners, make posters for themselves to try to incentivize them to do well. They have rallies for taking tests that does not do anything but put more pressure on the babies. They make signs all over the rooms. Now, I understand in part why you are doing this, to try to market the test, to try to feel good, but nobody feels good about a week-long test that you know is only going to tell you how bad you're doing and not the growth that you have attained. The other indicator is, the other factor is, what about schools that have a high percentage of special needs diverse learners? Our school has almost 30%. We have almost 500 enrollment. That means almost 150 of our students are diverse learners with have no accommodations when they take some of these standardized testings that factor into our score and our rating. What kind of sense does that make? Why are they not making any accommodations for that? Why is that not a factor? How many schools in the CPS have almost 30% diverse learner population? Most of the schools within a mile radius are sending their diverse learners to us because we have a cluster program, because we have nurses, psychologists, social workers. We have case managers. We have all these resources, but every year they tell us through this school rating how bad we're doing instead of the wonderful work that we are doing for all these diverse students, because at some point and in some way, all children are diverse learners. All of them have special needs. All of them have something that's needed that you need to accommodate or modify to meet the need. But we cannot do that if the focus is on taking a test. We cannot use multiple facets of learning if the focus is how to take a test. This is why it's a farce. This is why it's a lie. This is why it's racist. This is why it's not meant for everyone. It's only meant for a select few. And I will stop right there.
Thank you, Felicia. We need those passionate parents. Jen, I started with you and I'm going to end with you because it is all about you. It's about the students. When you were in 7th and 8th grade and you were looking to see what high school you were going to go to, what made you decide what schools you were going to consider? What made you look at Kelly, and what were your friends also looking at for a high school?
Okay, so for me, personally, I knew since like 7th grade I was going to Kelly. I was in love with the school. I was in love with the students. I was in love with the teachers. There was because I used to go since like 7th grade, there was a social justice club that I used to go to like every Wednesday that was hosted by a retired science teacher called Mr. Lamb. And along with, I had a support group and support system of teachers already setting up for me when I was in 7th grade. I knew half of the staff, I knew the teachers, I knew some of the sophomores that were already there. I just like felt comfortable in that zone by the time I was in 7th grade. Like, there was a teacher called Mr. Hallberg who was there, who would, every time I was waiting for the meeting to start for the club, he would tell me a story or a lecture that he told to his students, and I'd go back to my school the next day and tell it to them. So it was just like this whole small little family that started to form for me that made me say Kelly is where I belong, you know? But it was completely different for my friends. I have a friend that goes to Jones now. I love him. But his parents were like so focused on the ratings, and they were like, how high are their tests? How well do they have? They have a pool. They have these all programs. They have a lot of funding. Like, he lives near me, so he has to like get up really early in the morning, take a train all the way to Jones, then wait till the train to come back. And he's like walking home at like 8 o'clock. Well, I'm already home, like finished my homework with it. So it varied, especially with my friends, because it seemed like I was the only one that was already dead set on figuring out what high school to go to, while everyone else was scrambling because they were on one side, I want to be here because it sounds amazing, and I visited every once in a while, and they look like really cool teachers and staff. But then on the other side, this school has a bunch of funding. They get so many programs. Their rating is really high. So it was like, I would watch as my friends would struggle to figure out where they belonged, because it was like, especially part of people who are in like the bad side of Chicago that don't belong in, like, you know, we're like, even like downtown made us feel uncomfortable because there were so many like people that would actually stare at us, which was like horrible. And it was like, but that's where all the funding went. And it was like, I either pick a school that is said to have a high rating, but it makes me feel uncomfortable, like I do not belong there, or I pick a school that I'm passionate, that I want to go to, that makes me feel comfortable, that I already know will accept me for who I am and won't judge me based on my last name, based on my skin tone, based on my culture. And it was like a struggle for them. Like, it was a struggle for me just to watch how, like, my friends would break down in tears because they had no idea what to do. They were so scared. And, like, how everyone on this panel, everyone in this room knows, these ratings mean absolutely nothing. But it's so difficult to figure out where you belong, especially when so many people put pressure on, look at these numbers, facts, facts, facts. You don't need to know these people. Just look at the tests, look at the programs they get, look at the money. That's all that ever mattered. And, like, it seemed like it pushed so much pressure to the point where people were no longer, like, enthusiastic about education to me, you know? And that's such a huge problem.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah. That's an honor student. That's a sophomore honor student from Kelly High School. She needs another round of applause. I want to thank the panel for all of their wonderful insight. We're going to turn it over now to Jack Schneider. He's an assistant professor of education, College of the Holy Cross, and director of research, Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment. Schneider is the author of the recently released book, Beyond Test Scores, A Better Way to Measure School Quality. So yeah, you guys are relieved of your panel duties, and I'm going to turn this over to Jack. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I feel like it's the same, but I guess we're doing it for that, huh? Yeah. All right, let's put this here. Figure that out. Well, I feel like everybody said everything already, so there's not a whole lot left for me. I think my goal for the next 15 minutes will be to try to distill a lot of what others who have spoken to from their direct experience have already talked about this evening. And then maybe the piece that's new, in addition to trying to tie everything together, will be to talk a little bit about how we're trying to move beyond this through the group that I work with in Massachusetts. Getting a little feedback there. So, let's start with the story of two different schools. Yeah, we're getting some feedback here. I don't know if somebody will do something about that. So we got two different schools here. On the one hand, we have Kenwood Academy. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with it. And then on the other, and I'm not picking on any schools here other than to give you a school that is no. In all seriousness, what I tried to do is tried to pick two good schools that are in many ways diametrically opposed to each other. In this case, in terms of the student demography, right, we can see a kind of inverse relationship there between, in this case, our white and black students, although certainly there are others there. That's the clearest comparison of these schools. But I'll let you all guess which one of these is the great school. And of course, I'm not disparaging the work of teachers at either school, the work of administrators, the work that kids do inside classrooms, the care that parents show for their young people, but rather I'm talking specifically about the thing we've been talking about tonight, and that's the way that outside perception is driven by ratings, and particularly ratings that are constituted from test scores. So which of these is great? Well, we've got Kenwood, which certainly has accomplished a great deal in terms of what students are able to do as measured by machine-scored tests. Of course, that's a pretty narrow picture of what a school does. But then we have a different school, which, if you don't know better, looks like a much better school, right? There's more green, and green is good. And so one of the things that I heard tonight and that I hope we can all talk about when we leave this building is that when people talk about schools as if they are good or bad, they neglect the fact that schools are not uniformly good or bad, and they neglect the fact that most of the measures available to us ignore most of what we care about when we talk about good or bad schools. And so when folks were talking about the schools that they have either been served by as students or that they work in as teachers, or that they are a part of a community in as parents, right? I heard people talk about a lot of the things that good schools do. Good schools make you feel like you belong, like people care about you, you feel safe, you feel like you're going to be challenged there and like your ideas matter. None of these things are measured by most of the available metrics, and of course those feed into the way that people talk about schools. And so the next time people say that a school is good or bad, I invite you to respond to them the same way I do, which is to say, tell me about your visit to that school. And they'll go, well, I've never been to that school. And then you go, well, how on earth do you know that it's good? I'll just take a time out and tell you that I overheard somebody the other day, dad and his son, they're sitting, dad's having coffee and doing what most dads do these days, just fooling around on his phone, ignoring his kid. And a stranger walks up and does what strangers do, just starts talking to him and said, you know, where do you go to school? And the kid said, and it's no place I ever heard of. And the stranger turns to the father and goes, congratulations, your son goes to one of the finest schools in the state. And the dad goes, oh, what? What's that? And he goes, oh, that's one of the best schools in the state. And the dad goes, oh, well, it's one of the reasons we moved here. Yeah, so, you know, the schools. And the guy goes, no. Those schools are amazing. If I could afford to live here, I would send Mike. These schools are the best school. Of course, what we have here is a situation where somebody who has never been in the schools and who doesn't even live here is insisting that these are the very best schools. Meanwhile, we have an expert who is being completely ignored, right? The kid who actually goes to school there 180 days a year. The stranger leaves, the dad turns, again, ignoring the fact that he's got an expert right next to him if he wants to know how good the school is, and says, well, how does that make you feel? You go to one of the best schools in the state. The kid goes, it's all right. All right, so we're talking about which of these two is great. I don't think there we go. All right, but this is something that was alluded to earlier, but what is being measured here? So we'll get into the narrowness of tests in a minute, but let's talk about this. Right? Which is that, and again, this is something that has been alluded to and actually spoken directly to already, which is that when we're talking about student test scores, we are largely not talking about schools. And so what you can see here is that roughly 3/4, between 2/3 and 3/4, it obviously varies, of student standardized test scores are predicted by out-of-school factors. And again, this has been spoken to already, but I'll just tell you about my own family. Right? So when my daughter gets home from school, her mother's a teacher, a high school English teacher. Her father's an education professor, former high school history teacher. When my daughter gets home from school, and she gets home from school whenever we want her to, because we both have relatively flexible schedules, one of her parents is picking her up every day. We bring her home to our home, which is always warm in the wintertime and always cool in the summertime. She can have something to eat. I make homework fun, which that's actually really hard. But it is something that is essential if you want your child to not feel like school sucks. Because I say, what are we working on today? And she goes, oh. And I said, well, that sounds fun. I mean, it doesn't. It almost never sounds fun. I go, that sounds really fun. Can I help? And she goes, oh. And I said, you know what? I think we need some hot chocolate. So I start making some hot chocolate. I said, give her the hot chocolate. She doesn't get that when she's not doing her homework, by the way. All right, you know, we go on and on. We're sitting together. I'm making jokes. I don't make jokes. Well, no, I do make jokes when we're not doing homework. But I'm trying to make this a pleasant experience for her. Again, I have a PhD. My wife has a master's. We have a bunch of overeducated people focused on this kid, right? Oh, you're doing great. Keep it. Then homework time is over. I say, what do you want to do? Right? You want to go to the museum? You want to go pick out some books at the library? Right? It's like this kid is getting advantage on top of advantage on top of advantage. Then I'm going to send her to school, and what? We're going to say that she is a good reader and cares about school and feels good about herself as a student because of something the school did? Certainly the school is helping. Absolutely. She's got a bunch of diverse classmates who she learns from in different ways every single day. She's learning a lot from them. She's learning a lot from her teacher. But think about the inverse there. If we say, well, you've got a kid who doesn't have every single advantage my kid gets, and we're going to send her to school, and then we're going to say, it's the teacher, right? It's that teacher who's not teaching her stuff. No, it's the school that's not doing its job. Well, maybe we should step back and say, well, what would it take for us as a society? What would we have to commit to every single kid if we wanted every single kid to be able to show up and thrive, right? Then maybe we can talk about schools and teachers once we've done that as a society, right? And so that's what this statistic shows, right? Is that about 2/3 to 3/4 of what kids produce on these externally produced, machine-scored, largely multiple-choice standardized tests, and we'll get to the narrowness in a minute, tells us more about what's going on out of school than about what's going on in school. And we've heard some incredible stories about the things that happen inside school at schools attended by students who don't have every single privilege. See if I keep going the right way. I don't think that's the right way. There we go. Okay, so are these school ratings, right? This is one of the questions that then arises as we're thinking about, well, what are the predictors of standardized test scores? Well, okay, so 7 out of 10, you know, that's not bad, but that's a C- if you're in my class, right? So this is your greatschools.org score. And if we had a lot more time, I would show you how these tools get built into real estate websites. So you've seen this before? So where I live in the Boston area, and in my neighborhood, you can pull up, well, you can't do this anymore because I had a phone call where I may have threatened a lawsuit against them, but it used to be, at least, that you could pull up my neighborhood on this website, and you could see all the homes available for purchase. And then you could set the Great Schools rating and say, well, do I care about schools? Well, no, 0. I'll rate it at 0. And you can see all the schools where you could send your kid, right? Great Schools gives this school a 0 and this school a 0, so you could buy a home and go to this terrible school or this terrible. And then you say, well, I don't want my kid to go to a 0 school, so you set it to 10, right? 10's the best, 10 out of 10. You can't get any better than that. It's an A+. So you set it to 10, and all the schools disappear off the map, right? This walks, by the way, a very thin, this is why they, maybe were a little worried about this once somebody brought it to their attention. This walks a very thin legal line with regard to steering people, because if the test scores are really reflecting demography, and if you're then steering people to particular neighborhoods based on demography, well, that's against the law, right? And so it's really important that we think about these school ratings for a variety of reasons, because of the direct impact they have on schools, because of what they do to morale among students and teachers, because of the implications they can have for funding, et cetera, et cetera. But let's not forget that if we want to have diverse public schools that serve all kinds of kids and that have equal resources for educating young people in the environment that they thrive best in, then we need to do something about ratings that steer people away from some schools and towards other schools, particularly if those ratings don't really map onto reality, right? From what I've heard, I don't hear, oh, Kenwood, it's okay. It's like a C- school, right? It's like I'd give it a 7, right? But that's what we get here. Meanwhile, let's look at demography here, right? So are we talking about a school rating, or are we talking about something different? So as I alluded to, right, when we're saying that this school gets this rating, is it because of the work of the school, or is it because the test scores are reflecting something different, perhaps less access to social and economic privilege? So what we see here is the surrounding neighborhood, and there's the school. And then let's look at our counterpart, which, again, I'm in earnest here. I'm not picking on our other school here, but is it a better school, right? It gets a 10 out of 10, right? Is it a better school? Or are we talking about a different kind of community, right? And then there's our other school. So, of course, it matters what you measure, and of course matters how you measure. If you're talking about, are you actually measuring the school here? So, of course, test scores are test scores, but, let's at least look at them fairly and do a kind of apples to apples comparison. So instead of looking at proficiency scores, and again, that was discussed earlier, and saying, well, these kids, score higher on these machine scored standardized multiple choice tests. It's like, well, I could have told you that they would score higher because, you got these parents with graduate degrees, flexible schedule, lots of external income coming into the house, every advantage. But how much are they growing? And on this measure, the much lambasted Chicago Public Schools are leading the country in academic growth. And it's a striking case, according to researcher Sean Reardon. Now, this is just test scores. But again, we can see just how naked the emperor is if we say that we have a broken system, but even a less broken version of that system is actually a whole lot fairer to schools that serve diverse students, right? To schools with historically marginalized racial groups, historically marginalized language groups, economically disadvantaged groups. Even just do an apples to apples comparison, you're going to get a different picture. All right, let's talk a little bit about an alternative here. So this is our framework for school quality. And it tends to map much more onto the reality that people feel when they talk about the things that matter to them, right? So we looked at what gets counted in CPS, and we talked a little bit about the things that get counted, like on greatschools.org, for instance, or niche.com, or School Digger, or US News and World Report, right? These things which are primarily designed for people who are not interested in spending much time in schools, but who would rather have an easy list of schools prepared for them, rank ordered top to bottom so that they can go out and shop for a school, right? The things that are included in those kinds of lists. But I heard a lot of people talk tonight about things like, oh, I don't know, student physical safety and emotional safety, about student sense of belonging, talking about teachers. I heard teachers talking about the professional community and the support for teaching development and growth there. I heard people talk about resources, about the physical space and materials, as well as about content specialists. I heard somebody talking about social and emotional health earlier, right? So what we did is we reviewed educational research, and then we also looked at polling. There's been a lot of work polling the American people, and not just some American people, but all American people, polling them, what do you care about? What does a good school do? What do you want schools to do for your kids? What do you believe that schools do for your community? So we reviewed all this, and then what we did is we actually took it to our stakeholders. So our consortium has 6 districts in it, and we tried to build a series of partners that represented Massachusetts as a whole. So we have 6 districts, including Boston. And then we went out, once we had a draft of this framework, we went out and we met with students. Students, imagine that. Imagine actually talking to students. They know some stuff. Teachers, principals, district administrators, parents, community members. When we talked to parents and community members, we ran those sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in Haitian Creole, sometimes in Portuguese, sometimes in Arabic, sometimes in Mandarin Chinese, sometimes in Korean. I'm probably forgetting something here. And we said, well, what's missing? What's not on here that should be? What's on here that doesn't matter? What's confusing on here? And we went through these rounds of iterations where we eventually produced this framework. And of course, academic learning's on there, but you can see it in the context of what we all know about what schools have done for us individually if they've succeeded, what they've done for our children if the schools have succeeded, what they do when we're a part of them as school communities, whether we're educators or parents or the students inside them. Back to test scores again. We're returning to test scores in terms of making one particular point. This is another point I hope we can all make, because sometimes people will say, yes, but test scores matter. And then we can say, well, maybe, or maybe not. And let's consider the maybe not perspective for just a moment. And as we consider that, let's think about all of the things that we want schools to do. And then let's ask a simple question. If a school gets good test scores, does that mean that it necessarily does well at all of the other things? is there necessarily a relationship? Well, you all know the answer to that already, but the other person you're fictitiously talking to might not. So that's you asking the question, right? And here's just one piece of evidence from a study we did. And this is just one small district. And we just did it almost for fun because we didn't know what the answer would be. But it turned out to be so striking that I made a slide out of it, which is, so we have the Massachusetts, I'm going to step away from the mic. I got to take it with me if I do this, don't I? So in Massachusetts, whoa, it's got a lot. In Massachusetts, we have an overall school ranking called the PPI, right? And this is the PPI rating. So we rank ordered our schools 1 through 7 according to the PPI rating. And then, even though one of the things that I do not believe in is aggregating, let's see if I can go back. I don't know if I know how to go back. Yeah, I do. I don't believe in aggregating all of this, right? You don't put all of this into a blender and blend it together. Y'all remember art class where you mixed all the colors together?
You get that gross color.
Yeah, it's like, I don't even know how to describe the color it makes. But it's puke is a good way of describing it, right? But it's not red, and it's not blue, and it's not yellow, right? And so if you mix all that together, you can't see what a school is actually knocking it out of the park in, and then those areas where it actually needs some support, right? And so I don't believe in aggregating all of this, but for the sake of the exercise, we'll aggregate. Where are we going? There we go. We'll aggregate. So that's what this is. This is the composite. This is our school quality framework composite. So we've got them rank ordered here. And then you see, it like doesn't entirely mismatch, but this is a big miss here. And this is a miss, and this is a miss. So this is just the aggregate, right? But look what happens when you look at the particular categories. And this is just the 5 major categories grouped together. So this is not every single component. It wouldn't have fit on the slide. And you can see, look at that. That school's #1 in PPI and #1 on our composite. They're doing great for everything else. But look at character and well-being outcomes. Imagine if you didn't actually measure that. Imagine if you assumed this is a great school. It's got nothing to worry about. Everybody should be competing against each other to send their kids there. We should be praising this school, heaping awards on this school. Meanwhile, something's going on, right? Or take a look at this one. #2, the teachers in the teaching environment, and it's got a school culture issue. Look at this school. It's #4 according to PPI, #3 according to the composite. Incredible teachers, and probably a great principal. And look at those character and well-being outcomes. And then all the way at the bottom, we have our 7th ranked school, which is, certainly has some strengths. And one of those strengths appears to be those character and well-being outcomes that a lot of us care about, insofar as we leave school one day to be people who are either ethical, humane, positive citizens who contribute to the societies of which we're a part, or not. And then finally, it really matters how you present the data. So one of the things we actually do is we do survey. We survey teachers and we survey students, but one of the things we don't do, and there are 2 lessons here, is 1, there are no stakes attached to this. Right? Because if there are stakes, it will be manipulated. And it doesn't matter if it's 1 variable or if it's 34 variables. If there are stakes, they will be manipulated. People will do whatever they have to do to get their stats, right? And here's something that you can say when somebody says, well, what are you going to do? You're just not going to hold schools accountable? You can say, well, gosh, who runs the schools? Last time I thought it was the communities that they were in. I thought they belonged to us. Are you telling me I'm incompetent and that I don't know how to hold my school accountable? Are you telling me that as the person who is closest to the school, who actually goes and sets foot inside it, who knows some of the teachers there, as the person who sends his child there, you're telling me that I am less well positioned to take action if something's wrong at this school than you are from your centralized location, using the data that you've got on your computer screen? It's a little insulting, I think. The second thing that we do is that we don't present data in a way that gives you a ranking, that pits schools against each other, that misrepresents the reality of how a school is performing. Let me give you one clear way of how data it's one of these researcher tics, data is plural, anyway. Well, one of the ways that data get misrepresented, even if it's true, right? If they didn't see the air quotes, they're not going to know why I just said true instead of true. But there were air quotes there. So even if the data is true, right, it can be misrepresented. So let me just give you one example. So 5 essentials often gets presented in, I think it's quintiles rather than quartiles. So it's like top 20%, next 20%, next 20%, next 20%. And that is because they are essentially saying, we have no idea what's good. We don't know if you're good or bad. You're in the top 20%. That's probably good, right? We have no idea if it's good or bad. You're in the bottom 20%, so you're probably pretty bad, right? But what if? What if most schools are okay or good? Then what you're saying is, we're actually stigmatizing all these schools unnecessarily. Or conversely, what if most schools are struggling in a particular area? You're again misrepresenting reality. And so isn't it more important to say, let's figure out what good actually is. And then it doesn't matter what the school down the street does. And it doesn't matter what the school across town does or the school down south. Or it doesn't matter. It just matters what we're doing. And shouldn't people have a bit of a say in setting those expectations themselves? And so one of the things that we're trying to do that is a little out there is we're actually asking people, like, what do you want schools to do in terms of performance here? What are your actual standards? So that instead of ranking schools or pitting them against each other, or dividing them into groups of 4 or groups of 5, why don't we just say theoretically all schools could be good? Because they could, right? Theoretically, all schools could be good. So let's figure out what good is, and let's let the people who are actually affected by those schools be a part of saying what good is. And then once we've done that, we can figure out where are the weaknesses and who's responsible for those weaknesses? Because some of the responsibility lies outside of the school, right? And so what does our school need in order to get where we want it to be across every single domain? And now we can begin having conversations about mutual accountability. All right, you're going to hold us accountable for some outcomes. We're going to hold you accountable for all this other stuff that's going to enable us to get there. Right? That's a much healthier kind of conversation than people who are external to a school community, working with figures that don't align with reality, working with figures that do align pretty strongly with race, family income, parental educational attainment, family home language, immigration status. I could go on, right? Working with figures like that and then trying to shame, punish, stigmatize schools, again, particularly schools serving the least advantaged, as if that somehow is going to make the system stronger. Let's have a healthier conversation about that, and let's figure out, how are our schools doing across the full range of things we actually care about? Oh, I forgot to insert the zones. Insert zones here. Well, you don't get to see it. I'm sorry. You'll have to send me an email. I described them to you. Just to tell you what you'd see, it's not that exciting. But the innovation here is, instead of saying, this school is good, that's my serious word, this school is not good, and this school is really not good, and this school is terrible. How about we say, like, let's do some research. Let's figure out how long it takes a school that is not currently performing where its community wants it to be. Let's figure out how long it takes for it to get where it needs to be, and then let's frame it in terms of growth, because every school can get wherever we want it to get. But let's not label schools as good schools or bad schools, which become fixed entities in people's minds, right? And schools develop reputations, which oftentimes stay fixed despite the fact that the school has changed dramatically. And so let's start talking about, well, where is this school in this moment right now? And then where do we think it's going to be a year from now or 2 years from now if everybody actually invests in it the way that we should? That's what you would have seen here in a kind of visual form. But you didn't. So what makes a school great? That's where we began, that's where we'll end. It's not demography. That's not what makes a school great. I mean, sometimes it is, I'll tell you. I cry when I talk about it, so I'm not going to talk about it much. But I drop my kid off in the morning, and it's like, it's the best part of my day. Because I see who she goes to school with and who her friends are and how they teach each other things. And it's like, I feel for this like 5-minute window before she goes like, okay, Dad, you can go now. You got to go. I feel for 5 minutes like, you know what? It's going to be okay. Like, we're going to make it. Like, the clouds are going to part at some point, and we're going to be okay. So demography does matter, actually, but not in the way that school ratings take demography into account, right? What makes a great school? Not white kids, not a bunch of white kids, not a bunch of high-income kids, not a bunch of native English speakers speaking standard white English. You know, it's not any of it. It's not a bunch of students whose parents both went to college and are around all the time going, oh, let's make homework fun. Let me bribe you with chocolate. It's not scores, right? Even if the scores map onto reality, even if we do the fairest possible apples to apples comparison with scores and we say like, oh, well, we're going to look at growth, we're not going to look at overall. What about all the other stuff, right? So it's not just scores. And it certainly isn't ranking, right? Because again, let's use this thought experiment. If all schools stink and you're number one, your school stinks, right? So it's not the ranking that makes a great school. And you know, let's not end on that downer note. If all schools are great and you're ranked last, you're great, right? So rankings are not great. This is what makes a school great. Well, I mean, it's my definition. You don't have to buy into it. But that's it, right? I mean, I think we could all probably agree on that, helping young people develop their full human potential. So if we're going to talk about a great school, let's talk about that. So next time someone, oh, that's a great school. Tell me about how that school is helping the young people there develop their full human potential. And also, tell me about the last visit you made there. I want to hear all about it, right? That's what you can ask them. I think that's it. I think that's all I got. One thing that I want to do is I want to give you all my email address, just in case, there was a missing slide, or like maybe there's something I didn't talk about that I was supposed to, and So send me an email if you want to, continue the conversation. It's JSCHNEID. They did not give me the last 2 letters of my last name. My last name is Schneider. They just give me J. Schneid at holycross.edu. That's where I teach. You send me an email if you want to. Otherwise, I think that's all I got. Did you want me to stay up and answer questions? You want me to go away? What do you want me to do? Go away.
We'll make everyone talk amongst themselves.
Yeah, you talk amongst yourselves. Yeah. Thank you.